Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome back to AI and the Future of Work. This is your host, Dan Turchin, advisor at Insight Finder, the system of intelligence for IT operations, and CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. Thanks again to all of you, our listeners, for making this one of the most downloaded podcasts about the future of work. If you like what we do, please like, comment, and share in your favorite podcast app, so we can keep sharing great conversations ad-free. Work life has changed more in the past 18 months than probably in the previous 30 years. We now talk casually about this great resignation and how automation is disrupting whole industries. On this show, we've had recent guests like Panos Ziozos from LearnWorlds, helping make every creator an online educator. And we enjoyed the conversation with Renee, founder of Alice Technologies, who is disrupting the construction industry with AI. Those are just two of the many technologies behind these cataclysmic shifts in work. It's been a while since we discussed trends in how capital is being allocated and used to fund these disruptive technologies. Today, we get to discuss trends in capital allocation and entrepreneurship, startups, and the rise of growth capital with someone who's got a unique view from the inside. Dan Grunfeld is on the operating team at Lightspeed Venture Partners, one of the most iconic venture firms. Lightspeed has backed more than 400 companies over more than 20 years and plans to raise an additional $5 to $6 billion in the coming months. Few notable exits among a long list include Snap, Affirm, MuleSoft, TripActions, and AppDynamics. Dan's been at Lightspeed since the middle of 2019. He spent time as a startup exec in the virtual reality space. Before that, after 8 years as a professional basketball player. Oh, and by the way, Dan's also the author of the forthcoming book, By the Grace of the Game, The Holocaust, A Basketball Legacy, and an Unprecedented American Dream, which will be available starting in a few weeks. We're taping this in November. It will be available November 30th, 2021. Dan is one of the most humble, accomplished people I've met, certainly in Silicon Valley. I'm forever a fan, having witnessed his shooting prowess as a guard on some pretty talented Stanford teams from 2002 to 2006. Without further ado, it is really my pleasure to welcome my friend Dan Grunfeld to the podcast. Welcome, and let's get started by having you share maybe a little bit more about your background.
I'd love to. Thank you so much for that very warm introduction. I'm grateful. So it's great to be here with you. You said it well. Basketball was my first career. So played at Stanford, played 8 years professionally. Had the privilege to go to business school at Stanford once I retired from my professional basketball career. I joined a startup quite early in the virtual reality space. So using virtual reality as a training tool. And we started in sports, training NFL quarterbacks, training NBA players, and transitioned to enterprise. And we grew that nicely. And then, as you said, I've been at Lightspeed now for about 2.5 years, not investing in startups, but working with our startups after we invest in them.
Dan, this feels like a softball, but I've never actually asked you this. What are some of the comparisons between being a startup exec or even an operator in a VC versus, kind of the training, the discipline, the things that you learned as an athlete?
There's so many parallels. So first and foremost, I think of the competitiveness of both industries, right? Like when you're an athlete, it's such a competitive endeavor. And I think the same about the startup life. And VC is just an extension of that, right? Investing in those startups. And along kind of with that comes the things you mentioned, the discipline, the hard work, the determination. So in basketball, I was, waking up early in the morning to work out, staying up late to stretch and do the things I needed to do. It was the same at the startup, because if I wasn't doing it in both arenas, someone else was, right? Whether it was one of my competitors on the basketball court or another startup that we were competing with, so it really, there are such parallels. And that's why I think that I took quite well to the startup ecosystem after my career as an athlete, because they're so similar. And I'll say another thing, Dan, I think the tools that make you successful as an athlete can also be applied to the startup world. And what I mean by that is things like communication and teamwork and overcoming adversity, right? That's the name of the game as an athlete, at dealing with disappointments, et cetera. And as we all know from the startup life, that's going to happen, and so how quick do you pick yourself back up and remain positive and continue to work? So for all those reasons, I think that they're very similar.
So now you're coaching operators or entrepreneurs, and not too personal, but I remember a time, I think it was 2005. You tore your ACL. We all lived through the pain with you as fans, and I've got to think that there are some parallels with the roller coaster that is the startup journey. What is kind of that torn ACL moment for an entrepreneur, and how do you coach entrepreneurs when you know they're going through the kind of maybe pain that you've gone through?
Without a doubt. So in my case, I was the second leading scorer in the Pac-10 conference my junior year, and I tore my ACL on national television right at the end of the year. It was a very dramatic injury, very hard thing to deal with, but that's what life is, right? You have to kind of deal with what comes your way, keep moving, keep working. And so that's what I tried to do with my knee injury. I definitely can apply those lessons to not only what I go through today, but what I see others go through today. And I just think it's a matter of maintaining hope, staying even keeled. I think in the life of an entrepreneur, there are so many things that can be like that injury for them, right? They lose their marquee customer, their round of funding falls through, they lose a main exec, right? There are so many. It is such a roller coaster in a startup that it seems like every other week something's happening that seems like a torn ACL, right? So I always, if I have the opportunity, advise them to stay even keeled, stay positive, and just kind of lean into the fundamentals that made you successful in the first place, which more often than not is the determination, the hard work, and all those things that it took to get to that position in the first place.
So you're speaking to thousands of entrepreneurs, and over the 100 or so episodes we've published, we've talked a lot about kind of that, not so much the torn ACL moment, but the gut punch moments, of startup life. Give any specific example of entrepreneurs you've coached and something that, seemed like, they were down on the mat, and, how they went about, going through the quote, the rehab process of picking themselves back up.
And I think, COVID is a good example because that changed things for companies so quickly, right? And you mentioned one of our companies, Trip Actions, which is, corporate travel. And so when COVID started, that obviously is a huge issue when companies aren't traveling anymore. And I think what I saw from afar, what they did is, they maintained, their hope and their positivity. They made some changes to their product. They innovated and iterated on the fly. So I think there was never a time where people were feeling bad for themselves or lamenting the reality of how the world had changed. It was more like, here's the situation. How are we going to overcome this and not only survive, but thrive? And that's what they've done. I mean, their growth has been exponential since then. And so that's a specific example, but you see things like that all the time, and certainly at our startup, there were moments of great joy and prosperity where we thought that, we were taking over the world. And then all of a sudden, again, the deal that you think is going to change the company falls through. And now we're back at square one. And, so those type of things happen all the time. It's about how you deal with it.
So talking a little bit about Striver, you were a startup exec.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's a household name, not Striver per se, but the metaverse and notions of using AR and VR for things like training, not just the metaverse. What's your perspective on how to find product market fit in a space like VR or AR, which you were in years ago, years before it was really, the technology or the market was ready? How do you navigate your way through an emerging market like that?
See, on the enterprise side, listen, it's about solving problems, right? So that's what I always go to first. What is a big problem that this technology can solve? And I think in the case of Striver, there is a big problem, which is training. How do you, because we've all done corporate training to some degree, and maybe it's not always the most engaging. You don't retain as much as you'd want to. And so I think that Striver was at the right place at the right time, but more importantly, solving the right problem with technology. And one of our co-founders is Jeremy Bailenson, who runs the virtual reality lab at Stanford. He's a world leader on how VR impacts the brain. And all the science shows that it's a very, very powerful training tool. And you can imagine, if you put on a VR headset, you are fully immersed in a situation, right? So you could watch a video about, repairing an oil rig and how you stay safe. But if you're actually standing on that oil rig, and your brain thinks you're standing there, you can just imagine how much more retention there is. But at the same time, using VR, you're not putting yourself in danger, right? So that's the benefit as well. So I really think that if you want to find that product market fit in an emerging market, it's really about the problem you're solving first and foremost.
Any examples of where you've had to tell founders that they do not have product market fit when they think that they do?
Listen, I try to be supportive and constructive, right? And so I've had, very honest conversation with entrepreneurs. There's no like one specific example that comes to mind, but certainly like part of my job is to give honest feedback, right? And not try to shoehorn a technology into a, potential problem. And so I've done that often where I've kind of said like, hey, I'm not sure that this resonates with the market, and I'm not sure the market has shown you that there's fit here, and I think that's a very healthy thing to do. And I know that when we were building Striver and the company was growing, we definitely got that type of feedback, right? Because you're always learning. So we thought that the technology could be good for, use case A or B, but we had, seasoned folks tell us, yeah, I'm not so sure about that. Let's look into that more. And all the data we got suggested that it wasn't a fit. We moved on from some of those ideas.
I recently invested in an entrepreneur that really inspired me because she and her co-founder took a set of wireframes and a high-level concept, and they spent about $100 on Facebook to generate 50,000 pre-registrations. And to me, that was the best example ever of understanding your market, building exactly the right MVP to take to market that just resonated. Question for you is, what's an example of an entrepreneur you've met, or even a product that you've seen where you just said, this is it? I've seen the future, this is it. And just if you could describe that, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, we have a portfolio company at Lightspeed called Psycognito, which has grown tremendously well. It's a great security startup. When I saw that solution, a light bulb went off in my head because of their experience, the problem they're solving, and the product they're building. So the way they're going about it, right? The experience that they have, and so it's basically mapping your external attack surface based on an attacker's perspective, right? So the idea of, listen, attackers are going to try to get in a lot of different ways, but they're going to find the path of least resistance, right? Where is the door unlocked? They're not going to come through the front door. They're going to try to find the window. And so Psycognito's solution was really built around finding that path of least resistance and closing that door. And tremendous team, tremendous experience. They've grown amazingly well since I first saw them. But that was one where I saw the light bulb went off, and I said, yeah, this is for real.
In a super crowded space.
Correct, right? So everyone's trying to keep enterprises safe. There's security solutions popping up every day. But when you have, an incredible level of expertise, you're solving the problem in a unique way, and it is a real problem, right? Because if you look at all the attacks, again, it's not about, it's not coming in through the easy way. The attackers will always find these little niche areas to exploit, and that's what Psycognito was addressing. So I thought it was brilliant.
So you have this catbird seat being on the inside of this iconic firm, certainly, one of the most respected firms in Silicon Valley. What would you say it is about the Lightspeed culture vetting process that has made them Lightspeed and almost every other venture firm not Lightspeed?
Yeah, I mean, I have so much respect for the folks at Lightspeed and what they've built. I think for me as a former athlete, Lightspeed really resonates with me because, as you said, it's a renowned firm, such an amazing reputation. Being inside at our core, I think we really roll up our sleeves and get to work, which I think is the coolest part about Lightspeed. Very, very competitive, very disciplined. And I think, just the work speaks for itself. But for me, and we mentioned it prior, as a former athlete, the things that I really value that made, me or others successful in the arena are things, that's the way Lightspeed is. Roll up your sleeves, get your hands dirty, do the work to see the results. And then, of course, we have brilliant partners who have a lot of technical expertise, and have been practitioners. And so that type of pattern recognition and, domain knowledge is, that's unparalleled. And that's been a huge factor in the success as well. But I really just think, the determination, the motivation, the competitiveness is really elite.
And from the first time we met, I've always been intrigued by your personal journey, and I know it's something you're so passionate about. What inspired you to write the book? And maybe just talk a little bit about the background, your family history, and give us a little bit of a preview.
Absolutely. So I've been working on my book for more than 5 years. So as you said, it comes out at the end of November, November 30th. It's called By the Grace of the Game. So, I was a basketball player. I grew up playing basketball, played at Stanford, played professionally. My dad was a basketball player. So he played in the NBA for many years and, had a pretty illustrious career, not only as a player, but later as an executive. So he's very well known in sports and in basketball, but very few people know that he's the only player in NBA history whose parents survived the Holocaust. So both of my grandparents, his parents, are Holocaust survivors. My grandmother lives in the Bay Area. She's 96 years old. She's doing amazing. But she has a very big story surviving the Holocaust. Swedish diplomat Raoul Wallenberg, who's considered one of the greatest heroes of the Holocaust, he saved my grandma's life twice. So I grew up knowing about this story, knowing what my grandparents had been through, what my dad had been through as an immigrant who fled communism to come to America, and then knowing what basketball did for my family. And so I mentioned my book is called By the Grace of the Game. That's not an accidental title, because I always had this sense that basketball was really sent from heaven for my family because it took us to places we never could have imagined. And so I've also, when I was playing professional basketball, had contributing writing positions to several websites. It's something I always love to do. So when I had a little bit of time and space in my life, I said, this is the story I need to tell.
5 years in the making. How do you discipline yourself? How do you structure the work? You've had a full-time job. You've been raising a family. How does it all come together? Just because there's a great story to tell doesn't mean it gets turned into a book.
100%. And we just had the conversation about, how does sports and startups how do they go together? I actually said to my wife, because I always wanted to do this, but I said, if I want to do this, I have to approach it like I did basketball. Basketball didn't exist around my other things. I made it a priority. And so I woke up, I did a year and a half of research in preparation of writing the book. And when I was ready to write, I woke up at 6:02 in the morning for every day for 8 months to write the first draft. And people ask, why 6:02? Why not 6? And I say, why not 6:04? It was early, and I just had to get up at some point. But and so I was able to do that because of the discipline I had developed as an athlete. For me, getting up at 6 every morning, that was just what I always did. So and someone made a joke to me recently where they said, oh, 6:02, that way you could snooze and get up at like 6:10. And I said, listen, if you snooze once, then you can snooze every day. So for me, there was never a day that I pressed that snooze button. I mean, as soon as the alarm went off, I got up and got writing. And so it was just the discipline I learned as an athlete that helped me just stay motivated, stay focused, stay determined. And when I was done with the first drafts of my book, my wife, of course, said how proud of me she is, which I was very grateful for. But what I really said to her was, all I did was I had the discipline to get out of bed at 6:02 every morning, to write that first draft.
What was your grandma's reaction when she first saw the manuscript?
She was very grateful that I told the story. She's 96. It's a difficult story. Ultimately, it's hopeful, right? Because a family got from point A to point B, so it's a hopeful story. But there's a lot of difficult details. When my family came to America, my dad had an older brother who got diagnosed with leukemia almost immediately upon arrival and died a year later. So, and that's actually how my dad found basketball. He went to the local park in New York City to make friends, learn English, and heal from that loss. And he found the game, and he won an Olympic gold medal for the United States roughly 10 years later, right? So it's a real American dream story. There's a lot of great parts to it, but my uncle passing away, with my grandmother, she lost both parents and 5 siblings in the war. It's a difficult story. So you have to confront those things, but ultimately she's really grateful. And she's always been the type who's talked about her experience. And she's always said to me, I don't want to forget them, and I don't want to forget what happened. So I think, she's the best grandma in the world. She's just very proud and grateful, even though some of the things are hard.
Your great grandson to memorialize her story like that.
I appreciate it. I'll tell you that I mentioned she lives in the Bay Area. She came to every home game I played at Stanford. And she was at my dorm room every Sunday, picking up my dirty laundry, dropping off my clean laundry, stocking our fridge with food. She would even clean my roommates' rooms, which I would tell her, I call her Anyu, which means mother in Hungarian. I'd say, Anyu, you don't have to clean their rooms too. And she calls me Tatala, right? Which means it's like a Yiddish term. She said, if my Tatala is going to live here, it all has to be clean. So that's all to say that I'm the spoiled one in the relationship.
Look, if I'm in my 80s and I'm eating solid food, I'm going to consider that a successful day.
There you go.
It's pretty impressive. Now, pro sports leagues, including the NBA, certainly the NFL, have notoriously struggled with race relations and a lot of heavy issues, and certainly themes of anti-Semitism have come up. Do you think that your book could be a good influence, and through your dad's influence on the NBA, is there a potential this could be bigger than your family story?
I certainly hope so. And that's why I wrote it, because I felt like, just in general, there's something very relatable and universal about a story of perseverance, overcoming adversity, the love of family. So I think that those themes in general are very relatable. But I think, to your point around, very many of the social justice movements and the things that are happening in our society, what I always learned, particularly from my grandma and from my dad, is like, when you see something that's not right, you have to stand up against that. It doesn't matter who it's against, right? Because an attack against one is an attack against all. And so, I really do hope that people read the book and not only are kind of inspired by the personal triumph of the story, but also realize what's at stake when there is injustice. Because there's no greater example than the Holocaust of what can happen, when people aren't treated fairly and aren't treated right. And so it's never okay. It doesn't matter who the people are. It's never okay. And so that's something I hope that people take from the book. And if it makes a large impact, that would be a dream for me.
I got to take you off on a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's a good story. Your dad is famously in a 30 for 30 ESPN episode, Ernie and Bernie. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about the relationship there?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's actually called Bernie and Ernie. But if anyone wants to check it out on YouTube. So my dad played basketball at the University of Tennessee with Bernard King, who's one of, all-time great NBA player. He's a Hall of Famer. So my dad, after he came to America from Romania, they settled in Forest Hills, Queens. So my dad was a great player from Forest Hills, Queens. Bernard King was a great player from Brooklyn. And so my dad's a year older. So he went down to Knoxville to play at Tennessee, and Bernard went down a year later. And they became one of the greatest duos in college basketball history. So they each averaged more than 25 points per game one season, which in this, it's just unfathomable. They were on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Their volunteer teams kind of reached these incredible heights together. And they were really a phenomenon together. And so what's very cool is, so one thing I'll mention as well is when they came out of college, they were kind of considered to be equal prospects. And my dad still tells funny stories of scouts coming down and looking at them both and saying, well, he's really, really good, but he's really, really good. That's funny because, as a rookie, my dad averaged, I think, around 6.5 points, and a few rebounds. Bernard King averaged 24 points per game as a rookie. Okay. So, and he ended up leading the NBA in scoring. But what was very cool is they played together in the NBA. So they played for the Knicks together. And actually Bernard lived up the street from me. We lived in the same town. And so I call him to this day, Uncle B. And he has a great quote on the back of my book, a quote of support. And, what him and my dad did together is really the stuff of legend. And, they talk about once a month. They really love each other. And actually my dad was visiting me in the Bay Area not long ago, and he stepped outside for a minute. He came back in. He said, yeah, Bernard just called me. And they were just catching up, chatting and sending love to the families. And so it's it's a commentary on what sports can do for people. It brings people together, but it keeps them together for them. It's been roughly 50 years at this point. It's really special.
Everyone should have a relationship like that.
Yeah, it's so cool.
Usually we end up pitching startups in tech on this podcast. Today we're pitching an ESPN 30 for 30 short in a book.
That's right.
Turn events. So you and I both have kids, and on this show we talk a lot about themes related to the future of work. Think for a minute about the present of work, and in the call it 15 to 20 years when both of our sets of kids are full functioning adults, hopefully. What do you want for them as a dad, as a parent? What would that world of work look like that might be different from today?
Well, I'm not sure it's different than today, but what I would want for them is fulfillment, happiness, purpose. Because I think those things are so important at work. I think technology it really allows that and empowers that in so many ways. And you look at what's happened during COVID, where a lot of people have transitioned to a remote work environment or a hybrid work environment, and have still been able to kind of, to continue being productive, maybe spend more time with family, make different decisions for your lifestyle. I think all that stuff is really good as long as you can get your work done and do it well and continue to grow and continue to learn. So what I hope for the future is a world where technology continues to empower workers to do their jobs, to learn, to grow, to build incredible things, but to do it in a way that is really fulfilling and meaningful for them.
One of the common themes on this show is all the fear mongering associated with the loss of jobs due to the incursion of automation related technologies. And I often take a different stance. I think that any profession that is easily automated through the use of technology is probably not one that you'd ever want to be doing. And so let's call it, a service to humanity, that machines are coming in to take those jobs that are, we usually refer to them as dull, dirty, or dangerous, which frees up humans to be doing things that require empathy and, rational thinking and judgment and the things that make us innately human. When you think about a future where there will be kind of this coexistence of humans and machines, what are the skills that you would encourage your kids to be learning that you think will transcend, any kind of new technologies?
I think it's what you said, right? Which is the purely human aspect of interpersonal relations, of business, which you and I both know is some of the more important skills that you can acquire, that you can have. How do you communicate? How do you, like you said, show empathy, help solve complex, complicated problems, help uplift people and upskill people? These are things that, while machines can do some of these things already and in a pretty impressive way, I don't think you can never replicate looking another human being in the eyes and feeling, their emotion and things like that. So I think truly like the interpersonal skills that, again, like that are really important in sports, that are really important in startups, I think they'll only become more and more important. And like you said, technology will be able to replace certain things, but when one door closes, another opens. Like you said, there's going to be, maybe it's software engineering, right? Instead of, maybe kids are going to help build the robots that are now doing some of the jobs, right? I think that we will all adapt, as a humanity, and that people will adapt to be able to kind of fill some of these gaps that are created through automation.
25 years ago, there was essentially no web, and we couldn't imagine. We were scared back then, similarly, about all of the publishing jobs and the journalists and things that might be displaced because this traditional print industry was being replaced by the web. And it turns out, anyone that was kind of on the wrong side of innovation missed a massive opportunity to reinvent themselves. And I feel really strongly that we're at that kind of watershed moment where, AI and machine learning are creating many more opportunities than they're eliminating.
I agree with that. I think people are amazing, and so there's always going to be innovation. People always figure it out, and we iterate as a species. We create new things, we adapt to those creations. If new things are built on top of that, we kind of change with that. So yeah, I think that we're really amazing, and we always find a way.
Dan, I got to get you off the hot seat, but not before asking or answering one last question. I'm curious. So you're early in your book tours, and books being published in a couple of weeks. Craziest either question you've been asked about the book, or something that happened in a book tour, or something that is kind of behind the scenes.
It's the most fun part is I've been getting a lot of notes, messages, emails about my dad and his playing career, and reflections upon it, or people who saw him play in 1981, or just all that stuff has been really cool. And I've definitely shared some of that with him, and he's told me some really interesting stories and funny stories. I'll tell you quickly. So, one that really stuck with me that I just thought was so funny that I'd never heard before is, he was this great high school basketball player. He was an All-American, one of the highest recruited players in the country. But here he was at the University of Tennessee, right? And this is the SEC, the best conference in the country. And his first game as a freshman, he told me, Dan, I remember at halftime sitting in the locker room and I had 9 points. And I thought to myself, well, if I have 9 points in the second half, I'll have 18 points. And that's a pretty good game for a freshman. So maybe I can make it happen here at this college level. And he said to me, do you know how many points I had in the second half? And I thought it was going to be like 0 or 2. So I said, I don't know, like what, 2? He said, no, I had 19 points in the second half. So I had 28 points for the game. And so I thought this really could go well, and it did. He was a first team all conference player that year, and he was really this phenomenon. So just little stories like that to really learn from my dad and from my family's history have been so cool.
That's a metaphor for life. That's not a story about basketball.
That's right.
Right? That's right. That's powerful. Good. Well, Dan, I want to make sure the audience knows where to follow you and obviously where to get the book. But anything you want to share about where they should go to learn more?
Absolutely. You can follow me on Twitter, Dan_Grunfeld. I have a book website, dangrunfeld.com, has all the information you need. We have some pretty cool programs where we're donating copies to organizations who specialize in Holocaust education and using basketball to build bridges amongst communities. So trying to do good through this project as well. And there's always Amazon as well to buy books. So wherever books are sold, my book is available. And just grateful for anyone who wants to engage with the story. And definitely, Dan, grateful for you for taking the time, chatting with me about tech, sports, everything in between.
Dan, it's been a pleasure. Love having you on the show. And maybe when the book goes best New York Times bestseller list, we'll have you back and you do a victory lap. I'm
here. Let's do it.
Good stuff. Well, that's it for this week. As your host, Dan Turchin, host of AI and the Future of Work. But we're back next week with another fascinating guest.